Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Prime Minister Imran Khan says peace in Afghanistan is essential for Pakistan and Tajikistan. He was addressing a press conference along with Tajik President Imam Ali Rahman in Islamabad. Khan said there must be a political settlement in Afghanistan after the US withdrawal. The two also witnessed the signing of bilateral agreements in various fields, including trade and defense. At least 12 people have been killed and a dozen others wounded as 3 bombs rattled Afghanistan's capital city of Kabul. The Interior Ministry said the bombings happened in a mostly ethnic Hazara area of the capital. The Taliban have denied their involvement while no other group has claimed the responsibility yet. Russia's upper house has voted to withdraw from the Open Skies Treaty that allows surveillance flights over military facilities. The vote comes after US officials told Moscow last month that Washington decided not to re-enter the international pact. The bill will now need President Vladimir Putin's approval to come into effect. Israel's parliament has elected former centre-left politician Isaac Herzog as the country's 11th president. He will assume the presidency next month, replacing Reuven Rivlin, who is ending his 7-year term. Meanwhile, opposition leader Yair Lapid has agreed terms with several parties to form a coalition government. India has reported more than 132,000 new coronavirus cases and over 3,200 deaths overnight. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 80 people have lost their lives to the virus and over 1,800 tested positive in the past 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.5 million lives and infected over 171 million people. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Prime Minister Imran Khan says peace in Afghanistan is essential for Pakistan and Tajikistan. He was addressing a press conference along with Tajik President Imam Ali Rahman in Islamabad. Prime Minister Khan said there must be a political settlement in Afghanistan after the US withdrawal. He said violence may erupt once the international troops leave the territory. The Prime Minister said there will be no trade with India until it restores the special status of Kashmir. Prime Minister Imran Khan and President Imam Ali Rahman also witnessed the signing of bilateral agreements in various fields, including trade and defense. Prime Minister Khan said the Gwadar port will boost bilateral trade between the two countries. The Tajik president reaffirmed his support to Pakistan for peace in the region. He also said both countries can cooperate in fields of agriculture and food security. At least 12 people have been killed and a dozen others wounded as 3 bombs rattled Afghanistan's capital city of Kabul. The Taliban have denied their involvement while no other group has claimed the responsibility yet. Meanwhile, the Taliban claim to have killed dozens of policemen in Nangarhar and Logar provinces. In a tweet, a Taliban spokesman also accused Afghan forces of injuring 8 civilians by firing mortars in Baghlan province. The government did not comment on the Taliban's claim. China will virtually host the 4th China-Afghanistan-Pakistan trilateral foreign ministers dialogue on Thursday. The announcement has been made by China's foreign ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin. Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi will preside the meeting. According to Chinese state media, the ministers will discuss the current peace and reconciliation process in Afghanistan. Matters related to security cooperation and counter-terrorism measures will also be discussed. In Syria, at least 8 people have been killed and scores injured when Kurdish-led forces fired live rounds at protesters in Manbij. The people are demanding the end of Kurdish minority rule over a mainly Arab tribal population. The US-backed forces imposed a curfew on the city and beefed up checkpoints around its main routes. Many shops heeded a call for a general strike. This came a day after security forces killed another person in demonstrations. Meanwhile, US Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, is set to visit the Turkey-Syria border. She will convey Washington's strong support for humanitarian access into Syria. Russia's upper house has voted to withdraw from the international treaty that allows surveillance flights over military facilities. The bill will now need President Vladimir Putin's approval to take effect. The vote comes after US officials told Moscow last month that Washington decided not to re-enter the Open Skies Treaty. The US left the treaty last year, accusing Russia of violating it, a charge Moscow denies. This comes as Putin and US President Joe Biden are expected to meet in Geneva on the 16th of June. Russia says it will closely monitor the upcoming naval drills co-hosted by Ukraine and the US. The annual Sea Breeze drills involving personnel from a number of NATO countries are set to take place from June the 28th to July the 10th. Moscow says the drills go well beyond what it called Ukraine's own Black Sea zone. In a statement, Defense Ministry said Russia will respond to protect its national security if necessary. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine have surged in recent weeks over the troubled Crimea region. The UN has condemned attacks on Israel's Palestinian minority by extreme right-wing and vigilante groups, including settlers. UN Special Rapporteur on Minority, Fernand de Varanes, said the settlers persecute Palestinians with the reported backing of security forces. In a statement, de Varanes said violence, hate speech and discrimination against Palestinians must stop. He said the disproportionate use of force in Sheikh Jarrah, Damascus Gate and the Al-Aqsa Mosque are some of the worst cases of violence against Palestinians. Meanwhile, Palestine has summoned 4 European ambassadors over their country's negative votes for Palestinian cause at the UN Security Council and WHO. Israel says it has destroyed a Syrian army observation post in the occupied Golan Heights. In a tweet, a military spokesperson said Tel Aviv will not tolerate any attempt to violate its sovereignty. He said Israeli troops stormed the post and detonated it with explosive devices. The spokesperson said this is the 3rd such Israeli operation in Syria in the past year. There are no immediate reports of casualties in the strike. The Golan Heights, a strategic military zone, was seized by Israel from Syria during the Six-Day War in 1967. Israel's parliament has elected former center-left politician Isaac Herzog as the country's 11th president. He will assume the presidency next month, replacing Reuven Rivlin, who is ending his 7-year term. According to media reports, Herzog received 87 votes out of 120. His rival, Miriam Peretz, received only 27 votes. Meanwhile, opposition leader Yair Lapid has agreed terms with several parties to form a coalition government. Israel has held 4 national elections in the past 2 years amid a prolonged political crisis. The remaining parties to the 2015 nuclear deal are set to meet today for a wrap-up session in Vienna. In a statement, the European Union said participants will continue talks for a possible US return to the deal. A chair of the talks, Brussels, said delegates will also mull how to ensure the deal's full and effective implementation. It said the discussions will be adjourned for at least a week. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan says Ankara hopes to maximize cooperation with Egypt and Gulf nations on a win-win basis. In an interview, Erdogan said Ankara is determined to restart the process of bilateral diplomatic ties. He said Turkey has serious potential for cooperation with Egypt in a wide spectrum of areas from the eastern Mediterranean to Libya. Turkey has in recent months been pushing to repair ties with regional powers as it sent a delegation to Cairo and Riyadh for talks. Erdogan expressed desire to use these opportunities for better relations at the maximum level. The African Union has suspended Mali's membership in response to last week's military coup. In a statement, the bloc called for a transparent and swift return to the civilian-led transition. It threatened to impose sanctions on Bamako if the constitutional order is not restored. The bloc called on the Malian security forces to immediately lift all restrictions on the political leadership. Last week, Mali's junta arrested the interim leadership and pressured them to resign. The West African bloc, ECOWAS, suspended Mali's membership on Sunday. India has reported more than 132,000 new coronavirus cases and over 3,200 deaths overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.5 million lives and infected over 171 million people. More in this report.
As the COVID-19 pandemic lingers on, it has rendered irreparable losses to communities around the world. A new report suggests that Africa now faces increasing recession, growing violence and higher unemployment. But many rich nations continue on the path to recovery after a year of deaths and distress with their ample resources. Britain is in talks with AstraZeneca for the doses of their vaccine modified to better target the variant first identified in South Africa. Japan is also reportedly planning to pledge an additional $800 million to World Health Organization's COVAX program. Meanwhile, World Health Organization says the newly approved China Sinovac vaccine prevents symptomatic disease in 51% of those vaccinated and prevents severe symptoms and hospitalization in 100% of samples.
And today, I'm happy to announce that the Sinovac CoronaVac vaccine has been given WHO emergency use listing after being found to be safe, effective, and quality assured following 2 doses of the inactivated vaccine. Furthermore, the easy storage requirements of CoronaVac make it very suitable for low-resource settings.
In India, while the second wave recedes, doctors continue to see an uptick in the host of dangerous fungal infections. The Health Ministry plans to more than triple the daily vaccinations by going from 3 million to 10 million doses a day in July and August. Meanwhile, in Australia, Victoria State has extended the snap lockdown for another week to contain the outbreak of the highly contagious Gamma variant.
In the end, this is about saving lives. It's why, on the advice of the Chief Health Officer, Professor Sutton, the current restrictions remain in place for Melbourne for a further 7 days with some small changes.
Israel says the small number of heart inflammation cases, mainly in young men who received Pfizer's vaccine, were likely linked to their vaccination. Turkmenistan's president has claimed in a rare foreign interview that the Central Asian country has suffered no coronavirus cases.
In Pakistan, 80 more people have died of coronavirus over the past 24 hours. The health ministry says the country's death toll is approaching 21,000. The ministry reported over 1,800 infections overnight, pushing the nationwide caseload above 924,000. Over 848,000 people have recovered from the virus so far, whereas the number of active cases stands at 55,000. Over 3,700 of them are in critical condition. Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa has hailed Qatar's support to the country in various domains. He said this in a meeting with a member of the Qatar's ruling family, Sheikh Ali bin Abdullah Thani Al Thani in Rawalpindi. According to the military's media wing, the Army Chief acknowledged the positive trajectory of ties between Pakistan and Qatar. The two also discussed matters of mutual interest, regional security and developments in the Afghan peace process. The visiting dignitary appreciated Pakistan's contributions for peace in the region and vowed to bolster bilateral cooperation. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Myanmar, the anti-coup activists have continued their rallies in Mandalay and Sagaing region. Meanwhile, Indonesia has called on ASEAN to immediately appoint an envoy to Myanmar. At a news conference, the country's foreign minister, Retno Marsudi, said an inclusive dialogue should be encouraged to solve the political crisis. Burma's civil disobedience group has welcomed the Marsudi's call. It said it is not the only one disappointed with ASEAN's lack of progress. In April, the bloc reached a 5-point consensus on Myanmar, including ending the junta's violence. The security forces have killed over 840 civilians in a brutal crackdown on dissent following the February 1st coup. Chile's President Sebastián Piñera has called for open talks to draft the new constitution. Piñera's ruling coalition suffered a big loss last month in the election of representatives to work on the constitution. The outgoing president urged 155 elected representatives to abandon the politics of the trenches. In his annual State of the Nation address, Piñera said he will convene the new body in the coming days. He expressed hope that the Constitutional Convention will respect the limits and the rules of its mandate. The representatives have 9 months to write the Constitution, which will then be submitted to a mandatory plebiscite. U.S. President Joe Biden has honored the Tulsa massacre survivors 100 years on during his visit to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Biden is the first sitting U.S. president to visit the site where hundreds of Black Americans were massacred by a white mob in 1921. The president observed a moment of silence for the victims of the horrific massacre after meeting with the 3 survivors. He delivered an emotional speech to mark the country's history of racial violence.
For much too long, the history of what took place here was told in silence, cloaked in darkness. But just because history is silent, it doesn't mean that it did not take place. And while darkness can hide much, it erases nothing. It erases nothing. Some injustices are so heinous, so horrific, so grievous, they can't be buried, no matter how hard people try.
Earlier, Biden toured the Greenwood Cultural Center and went through the photographs and new articles explaining how the massacre developed. Now moving on, the U.S. state of Florida has banned transgender women and girls from participating in college and high school sports. Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Montana, Tennessee, and West Virginia have already passed the similar legislation. The legislation makes Florida the latest and the largest state in the country to impose the ban. Republican Governor Ron DeSantis signed the bill at an event at a Christian school in Jacksonville. DeSantis said the law was needed to ensure fairness for women participating in sports across the state. Supporters of the bill say transgender athletes have an unfair advantage, having been designated male at birth. Meanwhile, the Democrats and the civil rights advocates have slammed the legislation as unnecessary and discriminatory. In the U.S., a firefighter shot one colleague to death and severely wounded another at their Los Angeles County firehouse. Officials said the suspect apparently took his own life outside his home, which went up in flames later. Sheriff's officials said no gunshots were fired by law enforcement. The suspected gunman, identified as an off-duty fireman, returned to the station for some reason. He then opened fire on his 2 co-workers there. Authorities say they have yet to determine a possible motive.
Actual motive of the crime, we're unsure yet. We still have to conduct interviews with all the fire station personnel that worked at the station all 3 shifts, family members, conduct next of kin notifications, process both crime scenes, first the firehouse, and then ultimately the house that is on fire once it's deemed to be safe to process.
Moving on, the largest ship in the Iranian Navy caught fire and later sank in the Gulf of Oman under mysterious circumstances. In a statement, the Iranian Navy said all the crew on board was disembarked safely. It was in waters near the Iranian port of Jazq on a training mission. State media said firefighting operations continued for hours but could not save the warship. In April, Iran said one of its vessels, the Sawiz, was targeted in the Red Sea. A container ship that caught fire on the 20th of May off the Sri Lankan coast has started to sink. The ship was carrying nearly 1,500 containers, including 25 tons of nitric acid and 350 metric tons of oil, along with other chemicals. Authorities are battling the blaze since for nearly 2 weeks, with flaming containers laden with chemicals falling from the ship's deck. Sri Lanka's Marine Environment Protection Authority has warned that the ship-pressed pearl could create an oil spill emergency. Tons of plastic pellets have also swamped the island's coastline, creating one of the biggest environmental crises in decades. The government has banned fishing along an 80-kilometer stretch of coast, while hundreds of soldiers have been deployed to clean the beach. While the president of Sri Lankan Fisheries Society said the sinking vessel will be a death blow to the industry. The U.S. has urged Central American governments to do more to help contain illegal immigration. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was speaking at a news conference with Costa Rican President Carlos Alvarado in San Jose. Blinken said good governance is crucial for confronting challenges and seizing the opportunities of the moment. He said regional cooperation to address the migratory pressure is now more important than ever. However, the top U.S. diplomat voiced concerns about the health of local democracy and human rights in the region. Blinken is traveling to Costa Rica to hold talks with leaders from Central America and Mexico. Now the business updates. The United States and China have agreed to maintain communication on economic ties. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He held a video conference with U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. China's Commerce Ministry said they had extensive exchanges on the macroeconomic situation and multilateral cooperation. It added the two leaders exchanged views on issues of mutual concern. Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury Department says Yellen stressed the importance of cooperating on areas that are in the U.S. interests. This is the second round of talks within a week between the top economic and trade officials of the two countries. European stocks have inched toward record levels fueled by energy and consumer stocks. Meanwhile, the strong economic data from the US and Europe boosted investor sentiment. The Pan-European Stock 600 index hovered 0.1% above the flat line, holding just below its all-time high hit in the previous session. Oil and gas stocks added 0.6% to lead the gains, while basic resources fell 0.5%. The FTSE 100 edged 0.2% higher and crossed the 7,000 mark for the first time since early May, while France's CAC and the Germany's DAX rose 0.2% after the opening bell. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now with the latest updates. You can follow us on social media at Indus Special.